4 empty spots on the water, no paddles drifting, no voices calling back through the dark. 5 teenage boys had left Pensacola Bay on the morning of March 24, 1962, in a 7-foot rubber life raft heading for a sunken warship 3 miles offshore. Only one returned. The Coast Guard recorded 4 accidental drownings. The case was closed in under 48 hours. But the survivors' written account described something the drowning report refused to address. What pulled 4 boys under the Gulf of Mexico without leaving a single body behind? Pensacola Bay opens flat and pale on the morning of March 24, 1962. The water is dark green and still near the dock. 5 boys drag a deflated rubber raft across the sand. The raft is olive-colored, 7 feet long, stenciled with US Air Force markings. Their names are Edward McCleary, Eric Ruyle, Warren Felly, Bradford Rice, and Larry Bill. All between 15 and 17 years old. The plan is straightforward. Paddle 3 miles out to the wreck of the USS Massachusetts and dive along its rusted hull. The USS Massachusetts was a pre-dreadnought battleship, sunk deliberately in 1921 as target practice, resting in roughly 25 feet of water. Local divers knew the wreck well. The boys had made similar trips before and considered themselves capable swimmers for their age. By early afternoon, the sky changes. A dark line appears on the western horizon, and the surface chop begins to build rapidly offshore. The boys are already past the bay entrance when the current shifts. The raft turns sideways, paddles slapping uselessly against the surge. Within an hour, the storm hits without warning. Rain falls in dense sheets across the Gulf, and visibility drops to less than 20 feet. The raft drifts northeast, driven by the current. The wreck of the USS Massachusetts is now behind them, unreachable and invisible. Water pools inside the hull of the raft. The seams begin to separate along the bow, and the rubber skin buckles under the pressure. The boys bail with their hands and a single canvas bag. The raft is too low now to paddle effectively against the incoming swells. By nightfall, the 5 of them are treading water. The raft is fully submerged, the Air Force stenciling fading below the surface. They link arms to stay together. The water temperature in the Gulf of Mexico in late March drops significantly after dark. McCleary later recalled that the fog arrived around midnight. Not the usual sea mist, he wrote, but a dense white wall that swallowed sound. 5 boys, open water, total darkness, fog closing in on all sides. They could no longer see the shore lights of Pensacola. The temperature continued dropping. McCleary wrote that Warren Felly was the first to stop responding when spoken to, his arms going slack in the chain. Then McCleary described a smell. Salt and decay, he wrote, rising from below the surface, distinct from the salt of the open sea. Something moved beneath them. McCleary described a shape, larger than the raft, passing slowly underneath the linked chain of 5 boys. Then a silhouette rose from the fog. A long, thin neck, McCleary wrote, like a telegraph pole with a rounded bulb at the top. Warren Felly was the first to go. One moment he was there in the chain. The next, McCleary's hand closed on empty water. Larry Bill disappeared next. No scream, no struggle McCleary could clearly describe. The boy was simply no longer beside him in the dark. Then Eric Ruyle. McCleary felt the grip on his arm loosen in a single motion, like a knot pulled loose from below the surface. Bradford Rice was last. McCleary heard him call out once, a single syllable, cut short. Then the chain was broken, and McCleary was alone. McCleary swam through the night, tracking the lights of an offshore platform. His body temperature was critically low by the time dawn came. At first light on March 25th, a Coast Guard vessel spotted a figure clinging to a navigation buoy 3 miles off the coast. It was Edward McCleary, alone. His lips were grey, and his hands had locked into a grip around the buoy's rusted anchor chain. Coast Guard officers wrapped McCleary in blankets and radioed the base. 4 boys were unaccounted for, and a search operation was immediately launched. Before they could ask him anything, McCleary began talking. He described what had happened in the dark, the fog, the neck rising from the water. The Coast Guard officer who received the account logged a single annotation beside McCleary's statement. The word he wrote was incoherent. The Coast Guard search covered 40 square miles of open Gulf water over the following 2 days. 6 vessels swept the area where McCleary was found. No bodies were recovered during the initial search. The deflated raft was located half a mile from the navigation buoy, partially submerged. The raft's seams had failed along the bow and port side. The canvas bailing bag was still inside, tangled in the deflated rubber hull. The Pensacola News Journal ran the story on March 26th. 4 youths lost in Gulf storm, the headline read. Search continues. McCleary was treated at a local hospital for hypothermia and exhaustion. He had been in the water for approximately 9 hours. A Coast Guard lieutenant named Harold Voss took McCleary's formal statement while he was still in the hospital bed, IV line in his left arm. McCleary described the shape again, more calmly this time. The long neck, he said, had a circumference wider than his own torso. Lieutenant Voss noted in his report that McCleary's account was consistent in detail across 2 separate interviews, but attributed the description to acute stress reaction. Consistent in detail. That phrase would become important later. A boy in shock does not invent the same neck measurement twice. Bradford Rice's body was recovered on April 2nd, 1 week after the incident, washed onto a beach 8 miles east of Pensacola. The medical examiner's report listed the cause of death as drowning. No evidence of animal attack, no visible lacerations, no bite marks documented. The 3 other boys, Eric Ryle, Warren Felly, and Larry Bill, were never recovered. The Gulf took them and kept them. The official Coast Guard report, filed on April 7, 1962, concluded 4 accidental drownings due to overexposure and inadequate equipment. The report made no mention of a marine creature. It did not address McCleary's description of the neck, the smell, or the shape beneath them. McCleary was discharged from the hospital 11 days after the rescue. He returned to school in Pensacola the following month, 16 years old. He did not stop talking about what he saw. To classmates, to neighbors, to a reporter from the Ocala Star-Banner who called the house. The reporter wrote a brief piece. Survivor claims sea monster took his friends. It ran on page 9 beside a hardware store advertisement. Most readers dismissed it. The town had already grieved 4 boys. The last thing families needed was a monster story alongside the drowning reports. But McCleary kept every newspaper clipping. His mother later described a box under his bed, full of folded articles, handwritten notes, and a hand-drawn sketch. The sketch showed a long neck, roughly 10 inches high on the paper, with a rounded oval at the top. No eyes drawn, just a shape. 3 years passed. McCleary graduated from high school and tried to put the incident behind him. He moved to Tampa, briefly enrolled in college. In 1965, he sent a handwritten manuscript to Fate magazine, a publication specializing in unexplained and paranormal accounts since 1948. The editors at Fate read the manuscript and contacted McCleary directly. They requested clarifications, distances, timing, exact sequence of events on the water. McCleary answered every question in writing. The correspondence was meticulous, the kind of correspondence a person writes when they need to be believed. In May 1965, Fate magazine published his account under the title, My Escape from a Sea Monster, Volume 18, Number 5. The article described each detail McCleary had carried since 1962. The fog, the smell, the shape, the neck, the sequence of disappearances. The response was immediate and split. Letters arrived at Fate's editorial office in Chicago from readers who had seen similar shapes near Gulf waters. Other letters questioned McCleary's sanity, cited hypothermia's capacity to generate visual hallucinations, and asked why no physical trace was ever found. The magazine forwarded some of the correspondence to McCleary. He kept those letters too. The box under the bed was getting full. Among the reader letters forwarded to McCleary was one postmarked from Tampa Bay. The sender had signed only initials. The account inside described the same neck. The Tampa Bay letter was dated June 3, 1965, 2 weeks after the Fate magazine issue hit newsstands. The initials were RW. The handwriting was careful, small letters pressed firmly into the page. The writer described being offshore in a fishing vessel in 1958. RW described a shape rising from the water near his boat, long and thin above the surface. No head he could see, just the column. He had told no one. He was afraid, he wrote, of being treated the way McCleary had been. He understood the price of speaking. McCleary tried to respond, but the letter had no return address. He only had the postmark, Tampa Bay, June, 1965. The letter would surface again decades later, cited in a 1983 survey of Gulf of Mexico unexplained sightings. RW was never identified. Setting aside the letters and the magazine, the physical record of the incident contained two documents that had never been fully reconciled. The first was Lieutenant Voss's field report, which noted McCleary's account was consistent in detail. The second was the official drowning conclusion. A consistent account suggests a coherent memory. A coherent memory challenges the standard explanation of hallucination caused by hypothermia and exhaustion. Hypothermia does produce hallucinations. At core temperatures below 32 degrees Celsius, the brain begins generating images disconnected from reality. But those hallucinations are typically fragmented, shifting, non-repeatable under interview. McCleary's account, by Voss's own record, was the opposite. The Gulf of Mexico in 1962 contained marine life that was incompletely catalogued. Oarfish, giant squid, large pelagic sharks, and whale species all inhabited the deep basin. The oarfish is of particular interest. It can reach 12 meters in length, surfaces at night, and its long vertical body matches several historical sea monster descriptions. But an oarfish presents horizontally at the surface. It does not rise vertically from the water like a telegraph pole, the way McCleary described. A sperm whale could produce a vertical silhouette by raising its jaw from the water. In fog and darkness, with cold impairing judgment, the shape might fit. However, a sperm whale surfacing near 5 teenagers would not take individual people down without the hydrodynamic disturbance of a 60-ton animal in shallow water. The depth of the open Gulf 3 miles off Pensacola in 1962 was between 40 and 60 feet in that area, not abyssal. A large shark could account for the disappearances. A tiger shark, in particular, is known to operate in Gulf coastal waters at night. But a shark attack on 4 separate people in sequence, with no survivors reporting thrashing or blood in the water, conflicts with known attack behavior. The most parsimonious explanation remains exhaustion and hypothermia. 4 boys, untethered in open water, cold and disoriented, sank beneath the surface one by one. That explanation accounts for Bradford Rice. His body showed no external trauma, no marks. He drowned. The water and the cold took him. But it does not address the smell McCleary described. Salt and decay from below the surface before anything visible appeared. That specific detail, the smell arriving before the shape, was included in both the hospital statement and the Fate magazine article, unprompted both times. Decay has a biological source. Open water at night does not smell of decay without a decomposing organism nearby, on the surface or below it. Neither Lieutenant Voss's report nor the official drowning conclusion addressed the smell. Both documents were silent on that specific detail. McCleary spent the next 2 decades giving occasional interviews, always consistent, always adding no new embellishments and removing none of the original details. His persistence did not read as performance. It read as the behavior of someone who had witnessed something they could not metabolize into silence. He never made money from the story. The Fate magazine article paid modestly. Later interviews were given free of charge, often to small researchers. The incentive to fabricate and profit was there. McCleary never used it. He continued to drive trucks in Florida and speak clearly when asked. In 1988, a researcher reviewing the original Coast Guard file noticed that 3 pages of the incident report were missing. No record of their removal existed. The researcher's name was Gerald Patton, a marine incident historian based at the University of Florida. He had been reviewing Gulf disasters since 1979. Patton had requested the complete Coast Guard file through a Freedom of Information Act query filed in October 1987. The response came 8 months later. The file arrived in a manila envelope. Inside, the incident log was paginated from 1 to 14. Pages 7, 8, and 9 were absent. The pagination was continuous. The document jumped from page 6 to page 10 with no explanatory note, no withdrawal slip, no reference to the gap. Patton submitted a follow-up request to the Coast Guard's Records Division in Miami. The reply, dated March 1989, stated the pages could not be located. Could not be located is an administrative phrase with a specific meaning. It is not the same as destroyed, classified, or transferred. It means absent. Patton published his findings in a 1990 issue of the International Journal of Maritime History, occupying 4 pages of a longer survey article. The journal article attracted modest academic attention. A Coast Guard spokesman, contacted by a journalist in 1991, said the missing pages were likely a filing error. A filing error. In a 14-page document about the deaths of 4 teenage boys, 3 pages had been misfiled in under 30 years. Patton cross-referenced the incident log with external documents, the hospital record, the newspaper reports, and Lieutenant Voss's field notes, which survived in a separate archive. The field notes covered pages 1 through 6 of the incident log almost precisely. Pages 7 through 9 corresponded to a gap in Voss's own timeline. Voss's field notes jumped from the hospital interview on March 25th to the final drowning conclusion filed on April 7th. 12 days were unaccounted for in the record. Those 12 days included the recovery of Bradford Rice's body on April 2nd, the medical examiner's report, and at least 2 additional witness interviews Voss referenced but never quoted. The witnesses were not named in the surviving record. Voss listed them only as local mariners consulted regarding conditions in the sector. No further identification. Local mariners. Fishermen who worked the Gulf waters in that sector would have known whether anything unusual had been observed in the area that night. No record of those conversations was preserved. If it existed on pages 7 through 9, it was now gone, wherever gone means in a filing system. McCleary was contacted by Patton in 1989. He agreed to an interview, the first extended academic interview he had given since the Fate magazine article. McCleary was in his early 40s by then, working as a long-haul truck driver based out of Tampa. His voice, Patton later wrote, was calm and flat. McCleary repeated every detail he had given in 1962. The fog, the smell, the neck rising from the water, the sequence of disappearances. No variation. 27 years had passed. The account had not grown. It had not shrunk. The neck was still the same width. The smell still arrived first. Patton asked McCleary directly about the missing pages. McCleary said he had not known they were missing. He sat quietly for a moment before continuing. Then McCleary told Patton something he had not included in the Fate magazine article. During the hospital interview, a second officer had been present in the room. This second officer had not spoken. He stood by the door and took no written notes. He wore no insignia McCleary could identify from a hospital bed. Lieutenant Voss's field report made no mention of a second officer in the room during the interview. The report listed only Voss as present. A witness in a hospital room who takes no notes and goes unrecorded in the official file. That is not standard Coast Guard interview procedure. Patton added this detail to a follow-up note appended to his journal article in 1993. He flagged it as unverified, but significant. Unverified, but not forgotten. In parallel, a marine biologist at Florida State University named Dr. Anita Reyes had begun cataloging unusual animal sightings in the northeastern Gulf since the 1950s. Reyes had no connection to McCleary or to Patton. She was tracking oarfish strandings, whale strandings, and reports of unidentified large marine animals from Gulf fishermen. Her database contained 43 entries for the period between 1955 and 1965. One entry was flagged in red at the top of the column. The flagged entry was dated March 24, 1962. A fishing vessel had reported a large disturbance on the surface, 12 miles off Pensacola, before dawn. The fishermen who reported the March 24th disturbance were two brothers operating a shrimp trawler out of Perdido Key. Their names were Roy and Dale Sims. The Sims brothers had filed their report with the Florida Marine Patrol, not the Coast Guard. That is why it appeared in Reyes's database and not in the official file. Their report described a circular agitation on the surface, roughly 15 feet in diameter, that persisted for approximately 4 minutes before the water went flat again. 4 minutes of surface disturbance, 15 feet across, in open water with no storm activity at that hour. The patrol log noted the report and did nothing. Reyes flagged the entry because the location placed the disturbance approximately 7 miles from where McCleary was later found on the navigation buoy at dawn. 7 miles is not a trivial distance for a surface event. It is, however, a plausible travel range for a large pelagic animal moving in deep water. Reyes contacted the Sims brothers in 1986. Roy Sims was still fishing out of Perdido Key. Dale Sims had moved to Mobile, Alabama, 12 years earlier. Roy Sims confirmed the report without hesitation. He remembered the night clearly because, he said, the smell had been strong enough to reach the trawler's wheelhouse. The smell, Roy Sims told Reyes, was like something very old coming up from the bottom. Not a dead fish smell. Deeper, he said. Older. McCleary had used the phrase salt and decay to describe the same smell in 1962, from 7 miles away, at roughly the same hour. Two sources, one boy in the water. One man on a trawler, 7 miles apart, both describing a smell that arrived before anything visible broke the surface. Reyes included the correlation in a paper submitted to the Gulf Research Reports Journal in 1987. The paper was returned without review. No reason was given. She revised the paper, removing direct references to the McCleary incident, and resubmitted. The revised version was accepted and published in 1989 without the correlation. The original submitted version, including the McCleary correlation, was preserved in Reyes's personal files at Florida State University. It was not publicly available during her lifetime. Gerald Patton obtained a copy of the original version through correspondence with a colleague of Reyes's in 1994. He never published it directly. McCleary died in 2004 in Tampa. He was 58 years old. He had never recanted any detail of the 1962 account. His obituary in the Tampa Bay Times made no mention of Pensacola, the Fate magazine article, or the 4 boys who did not come back. He left behind a cardboard box. His sister, Carol McCleary, described it in a 2007 interview. Clippings, letters, Patton's journal article, and the hand-drawn sketch. The sketch was still there, the same long neck, the same oval at the top, drawn sometime in 1962 and carried for 42 years without alteration. Carol McCleary said her brother never spoke of the incident to his children. He kept the box and kept the silence in separate rooms. The families of the 4 boys who died received no formal communication from the Coast Guard beyond the drowning certificates issued in April 1962. Eric Royal's mother, Dorothy Royal, gave a single interview to a local radio station in 1963. She said she did not want explanations. She wanted her son. The wreck of the USS Massachusetts still sits in the Gulf off Pensacola. Divers visit it regularly. The boys had wanted to be among them that morning. A small memorial plaque was installed near the Pensacola Beach Pier in 2012, 50 years after the incident. 4 names and a date. Nothing else. The plaque does not record a creature or a missing report. It records only 4 names and the date they entered the Gulf and did not return. In 2019, a journalist filed a new Freedom of Information Act request for the complete Coast Guard file from the 1962 incident. The response arrived 11 months later. The file was produced in full, now digitized. Pages 7, 8, and 9 were still absent. Still, no withdrawal record. 57 years after the incident, the same 3 pages remained missing from the same 14-page file. The official position had not changed. Filing error. The journalist published the FOIA result in an online article. Within 48 hours, a comment appeared from an account created that same day, then immediately deleted. The comment read, "The pages exist. They were removed in April '62. I know because my grandfather signed the removal order." The account was never recovered. The deleted comment and the anonymous account brought the investigation back to a specific claim that a removal order had been signed in April 1962. April 1962. The same month the drowning report was filed, Bradford Rice's body was recovered, and the 3 unnamed mariners were consulted and then erased from the record. A removal order for government documents requires authorization. In the Coast Guard's administrative system in 1962, that authorization went through the district commander's office. The district commander for the Gulf Coast sector in 1962 was Rear Admiral Thomas Crane, based in New Orleans. His tenure ended in December of that year. Crane's office records, held at the National Archives in Atlanta, were reviewed by Patton in 1992. No document referencing the Pensacola incident appeared in Crane's correspondence. Either the removal order never existed, or it was itself removed from Crane's correspondence before the archive was sealed. Both possibilities require someone making a deliberate choice. The second officer in McCleary's hospital room, the one who stood by the door and wore no insignia, becomes relevant again in this context. An unmarked observer at a witness interview, whose presence is omitted from the official report, is a detail consistent with interagency involvement in a sensitive situation. In March 1962, the United States military was conducting classified acoustic monitoring operations in the Gulf of Mexico as part of the Cold War Submarine Detection Network. The SOSUS network, sound surveillance system, had hydrophone arrays installed across the Gulf floor since the mid-1950s. The arrays were listening for Soviet submarines. Those arrays would also detect any large biological sound source moving through the water. A large animal producing low-frequency sound would appear on a SOSUS readout. Whether a SOSUS readout existed for the night of March 24, 1962, in the sector off Pensacola is not publicly known. The records remain classified. The acoustic record of that night, if it exists, would not confirm what McCleary saw, but it would confirm whether something large moved through that water. Roy Sims described the surface disturbance. McCleary described the shape and the smell. A SOSUS file, if declassified, could speak to all 3 simultaneously. No request for SOSUS records related to the Pensacola sector on March 24, 1962, has been publicly confirmed as submitted or received. The intersection of a classified military listening network, a missing incident file, an unrecorded observer in an interview room, and a consistent survivor account is not proof. It is, however, a specific configuration of gaps. Each gap sits in the same place, in the same file, from the same period, around the same event. Gaps that align are not coincidence by definition. They require a source. The source is either systemic failure or deliberate removal. Both have different implications. The facts of March 24, 1962 are these. 5 boys left Pensacola Bay in an underpowered raft and were caught in an unexpected Gulf storm. The raft failed. The boys entered the water. By morning, 1 was found alive on a buoy. 3 were never recovered. 1 was found drowned a week later. McCleary's account was consistent across 27 years of interviews. Lieutenant Voss himself recorded that consistency. The official report chose not to engage with it. The most consistent explanation is not a monster. It is a large, unidentified pelagic animal that surfaced in the sector that night. An animal of sufficient size, a whale, an oarfish, or a species not yet catalogued in 1962, could account for the surface disturbance Roy Sims reported. The same animal, surfacing near 5 buoys in the water, could produce the smell McCleary described, the shape he perceived through fog and cold, and the sequential disturbances. Buoys dying of hypothermia sink quietly. In fog at night, to a traumatized buoy already in the water, a nearby animal would appear to cause each disappearance. The shape McCleary described, tall, columnar, with a bulb, matches the raised jaw of a surfacing sperm whale partially emerging from dense fog at close range. No agency ever reopened the Pensacola case. No marine biologist was commissioned to cross-reference the Sims report with the McCleary account. No SOSUS request was filed. The families of Eric Royal, Warren Felly, and Larry Bill never received a cause of death beyond the collective drowning ruling. 3 buoys remain legally lost to the Gulf. The Coast Guard's documentation standards for small craft fatalities in the Gulf of Mexico were not revised after the 1962 incident. The same gaps were possible for years after. If all 3 accounts pointed to the same sector, why did no agency look?